The heritage of our Unitarian Universalist faith is complicated, like the histories of so much of our nation. In this country, the Universalist Church of America was founded in 1793, and the American Unitarian Association in 1825. After consolidating in 1961, we became the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, of which UUSS is a member. We sometimes refer to it as the UUA for short. Picture it. The Puritans of New England. They were strict. They were strict in every way, strict in life, strict in faith, strict Calvinists. But in the late 17 and early 1800s, the church was starting to fracture. Clergymen, for it was all men then, were questioning the assumption of the Trinity, that God is three, finding no support for such a thing in their biblical studies. This wasn't a new question. The Socinians and others had done so before in other parts of the world in the 1500s, and some, including Michael Servetus, were burned at the stake for asking the question, for doubting the Trinity. These New England clergy were also questioning the nature of God, as Calvinism asserted that God doled out judgment and that most of humanity was depraved and would be condemned to eternal damnation. The Unitarians and the Universalists were wondering about their own experience of the divine, which seemed in stark contrast to the Calvinist deity. And then the Unitarians and the Universalists, had the audacity to assert that God was actually compassionate and that we humans can continue to improve through God's merciful love. One man began to lay out what a liberal Christian was in the Boston area. One man, in communication with other more liberal clergy, began to write letters in response to the accusations that they were undermining the orthodoxy of Calvinism. That man was William Ellery Channing. The exchanges got pretty heated in those pamphlets written back and forth. We hear a little bit about that in the musical Hamilton. Those pamphlets just kept getting more and more heated. And the Calvinists began to throw epithets like, "What are you, a Unitarian?" 4 years into this conflict between the Orthodox and more liberal Christians, Channing preached a 90-minute address at the ordination of Jared Sparks on May 5th, 1819 in Baltimore. He made very clear what liberal Christians of New England were getting up to. One of his points in response to the criticism from Orthodox Calvinists was to define Unitarian in contrast to Trinitarian. He wrote, "We believe in the doctrine of God's unity, or that there is one God and one only." In other words, he took the epithet and made it an identity. Not the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, just God. And then he articulated that he and his colleagues who agreed with him believed in the unity of Christ, writing, "We believe that Jesus is one mind, one soul, one being, as truly one as we are, and equally distinct from God." Unitarian. God is one. Jesus is one mind, soul, and being. This may not seem like such a big deal in 2022, but in 1819, some people were outraged over these statements. This address was published. So not only the people that were there heard this message, it was published, and I hear tell, though I couldn't find corroboration of this, that it sold out twice. They had to republish it. So this word was spreading about Unitarianism. And William Ellery Channing was one person who was willing to rise up against the powerful, some might say bullying nature of the leaders in the Calvinists and other Trinitarians of the time, who were requiring that everyone needed to think and believe the same way. William Ellery Channing showed up. More than a decade earlier, the Universalist Hosea Ballou had already dismantled the notion of the Trinity in his treatise on atonement, as well as addressed the nature of God through dissecting the concept of infinite sin and punishment as espoused in Calvinism. In 1805, he wrote in that treatise, quote, "In order for a law to be infinite, the legislature must be so. But man's ability to understand is finite, and all the means which are in his power for the acquisition of knowledge are finite. All his knowledge is circumscribed, and the law produced by such causes must be like them, not infinite, but finite. An infinite law would be far above the capacity of a finite being, and it would be unreasonable to suppose a man amenable to a law above his capacity. All our knowledge of good and evil is obtained by comparison. We call an action evil by comparing it to one which we call good. Were it in our power to embrace all the consequences that are connected with our actions and our intentions, our meanings would seldom be what they now are. 1805. Or as the current UU theologian, the Reverend John Burns, wrote, if that didn't make any sense to you at all, Ballou argued not only that sin was punished in this life, not the next, but also that infinite punishment after death was inconsistent with the nature of a loving God. Hosea Ballou showed up. Now, both men insisted that reason should be employed to read Scripture and to determine its meaning and its application in their lives. Each of them had their own views about penance and punishment, and Channing and Ballou were fallible men. History is complicated. You can learn a lot more about Unitarian Universalism in that upcoming class with UUSS member Ernie Hall. See circuits for details. Relationships, whether with God or if God doesn't work for you, for one another, require that we show up. You can count on me like 1, 2, 3, and I'll be there. It's important to be there for one another, to make it count. In our story this morning, we witnessed Yellow being there for Blue for comfort. But author Otoshi notes that Yellow never said anything to Red. So Blue could only count on Yellow for care after Blue was picked on. And because no one said anything to Red to say, hey, maybe you want to be kinder, or perhaps Red can be hot and Blue doesn't have to be hot too, or gosh, what's got you so upset? Do you want to talk about it? I can listen. And because none of the colors invited Red into a relationship, they eventually all suffered Red's intimidating behavior. There was no covenant to point to remind Red of Red's better nature. Now, the therapists and social workers and teachers and parents among us might be wondering what the backstory is. Maybe any of us might be wondering what the backstory is that would create such outbursts and perhaps insecurity in Red. But I want to focus instead our attention elsewhere. Because the truth is, we all have all the colors and all the numbers inside us. And while our backstories do impact us, we also have some choice about who we'll be and who we'll become. So instead, for a moment, let's focus on the dynamics that have groups tolerate behavior that is not in the best interest of the group. Not interrupting it, not redirecting it, not putting boundaries on it, and how everyone in the group, whether it's a family, a workplace, a school, a team, a congregation, a nation, suffers because we are interdependent, and how we act impacts one another. Now, sometimes when a bunch of folks are witnessing and everyone thinks somebody should do something, this interesting phenomenon happens. Someone's going to do something. Someone should do something. Someone will do something. And then no one does anything. Sometimes not intervening, or when our own red behavior comes out, it can bring with it some shame or feeling badly. And then the shoulds take over. Should have said X. Should have done Y. It's maybe best to not should all over ourselves. It can become a perpetual downward spiral and further alienate ourselves and others. Instead, it can be perhaps more helpful to practice the behavior you hope to use the next time something happens. So you can be better prepared to lean into the discomfort and do something to change what is happening. Some stuff just needs to be addressed right away, regardless of our comfort or our shoulds. You may have experienced or witnessed these things. But practicing those things when it's not happening can help us get better at engaging them when it does. And sometimes we simply don't know what to do, right? We're watching this thing happening in the grocery store, and we don't know how to impact it. We don't know how to change it. The situation is awkward, or we aren't sure we'll be heard, or if it is any of our business. I had a conversation recently step over there, in which we were discussing this, like how to interrupt when we observe something or read it in the paper or wherever, city council behavior. I shared with that lovely human that perhaps a strategy, might just be something like the next time we are witnessing something that should not go on, that we just take a breath first, right? Ground ourselves, and then sing. Stop in the name of love before you break my heart. Think it over. If nothing else, it'll give laughter, right? Break the tension a little bit. I could just love the idea of imagining being in a public square and something happening and someone start singing that. And then the person goes, oh, right, better self. Okay. Online, frontal cortex. Let's go. Try it and let me know how it goes. It does seem like there must be a story contributing to Red's behavior towards Blue. What is missing from Red's life that has Red thinking it's okay to pick on Blue? Now that I think about it, the other colors clearly care about Blue, but they don't seem to know what to do until one comes along. What are their stories? Where are they in the somebody should do something? And what were the supports in one's life that taught one it was good to refuse being picked on? And what happened in Blue's mind or heart throughout the course of the story? Perhaps Blue is a universalist, recognizing that each of us are more than our mistakes, that we are still worthy of God's love, of humans' love, and that extending grace to Red was the right thing to do so that Red could reconnect with Red's better self. Maybe. Or perhaps Blue is practicing both and thinking rather than either or thinking, a very important skill, one we've named before in addressing the culture of white supremacy. Maybe. I do wonder, though, if the book may have missed an important teaching opportunity. Blue, now the number 6, asks, can Red be hot and Blue be cool? Red stopped, presented with the possibility of the both and. Then one says Red can count too, the universalism. Then Red rocks and rolls. That is, Red literally transforms into 7. And then we have the affirmation, everyone counts, followed by the moral of the story, sometimes it just takes one. In the Jewish tradition, we are in the season of the high holy days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I'm thinking about atonement, not just Ballew's treatise on atonement named earlier, but how we make amends when we fall short, when we hurt one another. When I think about covenant and the ways people can fall out of right relationship and need to be called back in to be reminded of the shared agreements, what helps that to happen? Folks who are Jewish are encouraged at this time of year to make amends for any wrongdoing during the past year. Small slights, large offenses. People intentionally seek out those whom they worry they may have hurt and do what they can to make it right. Making amends and or asking for or perhaps offering forgiveness seem to be part of that honoring of covenants. It seems there has to be some amount of risk and maybe some empathy. Blue, perhaps empathizing with what Red seemed to be feeling as Red rolled away, had to be willing to ask a risky question and extend the proverbial olive branch. But Blue was clearly hurt earlier in the book. I wonder if the next page might have shown Red, the same size as Blue, or 7 the same size as 6, saying, I'm sorry I was mean to you. Or, thank you for reminding me of my better self. Everybody does count. You, me, everyone. Or something like that. And I know that every story doesn't get tied up in a neat bow. Our lives certainly often do not. And sometimes we miss the opportunity to make amends, even when it is presented to us. Sometimes we sit with regret. Red may, in the next chapter of the story, we don't yet know, experience that. And sometimes there's just an awkward, unspoken thing in the room, right? Sometimes we are granted some grace by someone like Blue until we find our way back. Stop in the name of love. We do make mistakes as humans, right? What might it be like if we created a congregational covenant that included a way back towards one another when mistakes occur? If we engage in restorative justice practices in the wider community rather than only punishment? Unitarian Universalism is different now than its founding traditions and the consolidation merger in 1961. There are lots of different flavors, dare I say, colors and numbers of Unitarian Universalism. Our lives are guided by these UU principles, and we are encouraged to affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, as well as the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. And right now, our democracy is a dangerous, fragile place. There are people threatening others, threatening the integrity of the elections process, claiming someone else must have tampered when their person doesn't win. What might it be like as we approach this election season if humans really valued everyone's voice? If everyone counted? Our work with the UU The Vote campaign is inviting us into a deep practice of getting folks to participate in our democracy, for it cannot get stronger without our participation. When the bullies change access to voting and remove people from the voting rolls, instill distrust in elections, we are in big trouble. We need each one that resides within each of us and all of us to rise up, to run for local office, to support candidates who support UU values. Please stop by the table, write a postcard, or 100, or some of you I know have already written thousands. If you already have gone to the table and written some, bring someone else to the table and get them involved. There are so many ways that we can help strengthen our democracy. One rose up against red in our story this morning. One voice. One set a boundary around behavior that was unacceptable. One vote. One teaches the colors who become numbers that they do count, that they matter. One another. Our current Unitarian Universalism is less about belief and more about how we live our lives, and by living, demonstrate what we believe these days. UU22 needs us to live with integrity, open-heartedness, compassion, kindness, and so much more. One voice, one vote, one another. We know how to do this, to listen, to participate, to care for one another. Sometimes we just need to be reminded. Sometimes we need to start small. The poet Danush Lemaris says it this way in the poem Small Kindnesses. The poet writes, I've been thinking about the way when you walk down a crowded aisle that people pull in their legs to let you by. Or how strangers still say bless you when someone sneezes, a leftover from the bubonic plague. Don't die, we are saying. And sometimes when you spill lemons from your grocery bag, someone else will help you pick them up. Mostly, we don't want to harm each other. We want to be handed our cup of coffee, hot, and to say thank you to the person handing it, to smile at them and for them to smile back, for the waitress to call us honey when she sets down the bowl of clam chowder, and for the driver of the red pickup truck to let us pass. We have so little of each other now, so far from tribe and fire, only these brief moments of exchange. What if they are the true dwelling of the holy, these fleeting temples we make together when we say, here, have my seat. Go ahead, you first. I like your hat. What if? What if this place, this moment, this gathering is the true dwelling of the holy, of the beautiful, of the precious? Making space for one another's journey to make sense of this world, to ask important questions, to grow in self-awareness and get curious, and to tend to one another. May we be open, and may we be willing for to be hopeless. would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us, so lift us up to the light of change. Let us show up together as one. May it be so. Amen. Ashe. And blessed be.